Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining Arrowsmith's celebration of three great poets bridging the Americas. So permit me to say to our friends in Caracas, buenas tardes, muchas gracias por unirse a la celebración de Arrowsmith de tres grandes poetas. My name is Askold Melnyczuk, and I'm the editor and publisher of Arrowsmith Press. Let me first lay out the sequence of this afternoon's events. My introduction will be followed by a recorded tribute to Rafael Cadenas by a group of important young voices from Venezuela. This will be followed by readings of translations of Cadenas's poems by some of our own finest poets and translators. Finally, if all goes according to plan, Rafael Cadenas himself will join us live from Caracas. And it's looking good, though with the internet, you never know what to expect. After that, I'll return to introduce Fanny Howe and Thomas Sayers Ellis, who will read for a few minutes, then engage in a conversation. A writer's work is solitary. A publisher's is intimately collaborative. So before turning to the readings and conversation, I'd like to thank a number of people whose efforts behind the scenes have kept Arrowsmith going full speed this harrowing year. Our enterprising staff, whose devotion and good humor are the reason we stayed on course, included Jessica Skylson, Cherish Collins, Wes Smith, Laura Stekowick, Rishona Michael, Kayleen Mendez, Jacqueline Rosenbaum, Valerie Duff Stroutman, and our fabulous videographer, Rhea Amin. Above all, thanks to our managing and senior editor, Ezra Fox, who must be hydra-headed. He wears so many hats, all of which fit. I also want to thank our extraordinary book and cover designers, the artist Sheila Gallagher, who paints in smoke and whose work graces the cover of Rafael Cadenas's The Land of Mild Light. Taylor Davis, for her updated version of the American flag on Manimal Woe. And Aliaha Allison for the suggestive coded cover wrapping crankshake notes. And again, Ezra Fox for his inventive and meticulous setting of the books. A special thanks to Rowena Hill for her elegant and clarifying introduction to Cadenas's life and works. Over these many decades, I've been involved in innumerable book launches and readings, but few match the resonance and significance of this afternoon's event. And that, of course, is thanks to our remarkable poets, Fanny Howe, Thomas Sayers Ellis, and Venezuela's preeminent man of letters, Rafael Cadenas. The three books we're presenting before you this afternoon are why I became a publisher. Working on them has been a privilege. But maybe what makes this afternoon's event so singular is the work done by the editor of this selection of Cadenas's poems, Nydia Hernandez. Nydia arrived in Boston some 16 months ago, a refugee from Caracas, where for 30 years she ran one of the preeminent Spanish-language radio programs devoted exclusively to poetry, and developed one of Latin America's most extensive archives of recordings of readings and interviews by poets from around the world, having spent her life accumulating, as she charmingly put it, invisible goods. With the help of Boston's literary community, and with an extraordinary assist from the painter Sheila Gallagher and her family, Nydia wasted no time. She went right to work, creating one of Arrowsmith's most popular features, the monthly Poesia audio recordings, in which we offer a poem by a poet from Latin America, accompanied by an English language translation. Moreover, Nydia jumped right into the project we're celebrating today, the first English language edition of the selected poems of Rafael Cadenas. Here she involved some of America's most gifted poets as translators, including Robert Pinsky, Carolyn Forché, Sophie Cabot-Black, Shara McCollum, Forrest Gander, and others whom you'll see in a moment. Nydia's focus under such impossible circumstances is nothing short of miraculous, and will forever remain for me one of the great examples of the power of the pure creative spirit. The result of her efforts is a gorgeous book I hope you will all soon hold in your hands. Before turning to the recorded tribute, I'd like to read you a few sentences from Rowena Hill's introduction to the selected poems. This is now Rowena Hill. Rafael Cadenas is 90 this year, and his long life has been dedicated to caring for language, using it to disclose a vision of reality as near to true as language itself can allow. Rafael Cadenas is in every sense Venezuela's senior poet, a very human voice that for 60 years has accompanied thinking people, bringing pleasure, understanding, the recognition of affinity, and especially in later years, consolation and encouragement for his insistence on truth, the unsparing acceptance of things as they are. Literature, he insists, is only of value insofar as it illuminates and connects us to life itself. To which I'll only add parenthetically that this aptly characterizes all three of this afternoon's poets and is perhaps a quality of all great art. And finally, Cadenas in his own words, in Rowena Hill's version. Don't listen to the man with his claws out. Prefer the word that reaches you undistorted. What happens under the surface, circulating softly. Let what can't be heard take you by the hand. Forget the garrulous country. Be vigilant. And now, let us zoom to Caracas.
Los poetas no convencen, tampoco vencen. Su papel es otro, ajeno al poder, ser contraste. Las paces. Lleguemos a un acuerdo, poema. Ya no te forzaré a decir lo que no quieres, ni tú te resistirás tanto a lo que deseo. Hemos forcejeado mucho. ¿Para qué este empeño en hacerte a mi imagen cuando sabes cosas que no sospechas? Líbrate ya de mí. Huye sin mirar atrás. Sálvate antes de que sea tarde. Pues siempre me rebasas. Sabes decir lo que te impulsa y yo no. Porque eres más que tú mismo. Y yo solo soy el que trata de reconocerse en ti. Tengo la extensión de mi deseo y tú no tienes ninguno. Solo avanzas hacia donde te diriges, sin mirar la mano que mueves, y te crees suyo cuando te sientes brotar de ella, como una sustancia que se erige. Imponle tu curso al que escribe. Él solo sabe ocultarse, cubrir la novedad, empobrecerse. Lo que muestras es una reiteración cansada. Poema, apártame de ti.
Buenas tardes. Hoy estamos aquí reunidos para celebrar a un poeta y la reciente publicación bilingüe de sus versos en Boston, Rafael Cadenas, quien vive en Caracas, Venezuela, un país extraviado, secuestrado, pero que siempre ha sido tierra de poetas. Yo era una jovencita la primera vez que vi a Rafael Cadenas en una librería de Caracas. Tímido, silencioso, inabordable. En realidad lo que yo estaba viendo era al silencio, a la invisibilidad, a la distancia, a todo lo que huye, a todo lo que vuelve. Yo estaba viendo un beloved country, una tierra de luz blanda, ¿sí? Este libro que hoy presentamos gracias a Arrowsmith Press. Gracias también a importantes poetas norteamericanos como Robert Pinsky, Forrest Gander, Sophie Cabe Black, Shara McCallum, Carolyn Forché, Lisa Allen, Alejandría Hall y Sara Daniele, quienes nunca dudaron en caminar el puente que les tendió Rafael Cadenas para traducirlo y completar la tierra de luz blanda. Gracias. Gracias también a Askold Melnyczuk, a Fanny Howe, a Sheila Gallagher y a una lista inmensa que voy a enumerar con 2 palabras: generosidad, hospitalidad. Y también con estos versos: yo visité la tierra de luz blanda. La tierra de luz blanda es nuestro lugar compartido. Gracias al poeta Rafael Cadenas, gracias a todos ustedes por estar aquí.
Beloved Country.
Cuanto tuyo no se desenvuelve como música perdida en mí.
País al que regreso cada vez que me he empobrecido.
Sello, fasto, bóveda de los cofres.
Nunca me has negado tu leche de virgen.
Mi reflujo, mi fuente secreta, mi anverso real.
Ignoro el alcance de tu olor de especie.
Pero sé que has estado en todos mis puntos de partida.
Envolviéndome oriente solícito como una ceremonia.
País a donde van las líneas de mi mano, lugar donde soy otro.
Mi anillo de bodas seguramente está cerca del centro.
A poem by Rafael Cadenas, translated and read by Forrest Gander. Beloved country, so much of you remains unopened, like music lost inside me. Country to which I return every time I go broke. Seal, celebration, vault of trunks. You've never denied me your virgin milk, my ebb, my secret source, my real counterpart. I can't determine the reach of your scent, but know you've been there at all my starting points, wrapping me up, thoughtful east, as in a ceremony. Country where the lines of my hand lead, sight where I'm someone else. My wedding ring, you're close to the core.
Ars Poetica. Let each word carry what it says. Let it be the tremor holding.
Let it keep like a heartbeat. I will not falsely ornate, nor ink in doubt, nor add glitter to what is.
This makes me hear me. Here we tell the truth. Let us be real.
I want terrifying exactitude. I tremble when I think I am false.
I must bear the weight of my words. They own me as much as I own them.
If I don't see well, tell me, you who know me, my lie. Show my fraud. Scour out my scam.
I will thank you truly. I am mad to correspond.
Be my eye. Stay at night to spy me. Study me. Shake me.
The exile. The exile deplores homelands, despises boundaries. En route to a moment, begins to see how much energy is restored by what surrounds it. Things revived day by day, clings to the body, seeking its ancient form, recognizes mystery, despises unreality, sees his face reflected in a pond and forgets it. El exilado. El exilado deplora las patrias, rehuye divisiones, se encamina hacia el instante, comienza a ver. Cuanto lo rodea recobra su fuerza. Las cosas se avivan de día en día. Se adhiere a su cuerpo buscando el molde antiguo. Se reconoce enigma. Despide la irrealidad. Ve su cara en el estanque y la olvida.
This is Shara McCallum. I'm reading my English translation of the poem by Rafael Cadenas. They say, or rather, they interject. They look after the herb left behind by the barbarians. Scattered, they wander through rooms, but hold up the tower of language.
Difficulty. The actor destroys all that can mirror him. Instead of the direct route, he prefers the endless detour. He lives amid procrastinations, sharpening his ability to lose sight, overlooking, looking obliquely, hiding evidence, altering the facts, making other versions, adding to everything his dark salt.
Alone, insecure, urgent, word, house without adornment, for which I would want the power of the trees.
You appear, you undress, you enter the light, you wake the colors, you crown the waters, you begin moving through time like a liqueur. You finish off the most blinding of shores. You predict if the world will continue or fall. You conjure the earth to keep pace with your molten slowness. You reign in the center of this conflagration. And from the first to the seventh day, your body an arrogant palace where lives the tremor. And now we're delighted to welcome Rafael Cadenas.
Te toca leer.
Gracias. This is the word that we use to say thanks. It implies gratefulness. So then, gracias to all the poets and translators that I do not mention now because I have seen them gracias also to my dear Rowena Hill. And I wish to send my regards to Amelia Mondragon, Roberto Carlos Perez, and Margaret Rusotto, professors in university of that country, and Jane Katz, friend of our days in Boston. Before going on, I hope you will be indulgent towards my English, a language that I read like my own, but I don't speak for 40 years. Moreover, my relationship with the languages that I read, as I say somewhere, is not a marriage. I remain only as bridegroom. Now I will try to clear up my position concerning the exile in Trinidad, an island situated very near Venezuela. When I lived there, it was a British colony. Then in 1975, became independent, and today is a democratic republic. The reason why I was sent there after several months in jail was for participating in a student strike against a military dictatorship. At that time, the Party Acción Democrática and the Communist Party fought that regime, which was overthrown in 1958. After that, there were 40 years of democratic and civil government. Now, I wish to talk about my links with Boston. A friend, the well-known poet and writer Guillermo Sucre, recommended me to the Guggenheim Foundation. So I received a scholarship that allowed me and my family to spend a year in that city that we remember with gratefulness, affection, and even longing. Here, I should mention Dr. William Montgomery, who treated our son in the Mass General Hospital. Also, Julio Ortega and Juan Marichal were very kind friends when I was there. Both of them were professors of university in that nation and excellent writers. Ortega from Peru has done much to make known the Hispano-American literature. And Marichal did the same about writers of Spain. Incidentally, his wife was the daughter of the great Spanish poet Pedro Salinas. During that year in Boston, I used to go to Concord. That seemed to me the cradle of the great spirit of that country. I frequently visited Walden Pound and one Emerson's house. Now I am going to talk briefly of a giant, Walt Whitman. I discovered him early in the library of Barquisimeto, my hometown, when I was 14. And he fascinated me up to now. He is so postmodern that many people, including poets, do not believe what he says. By the way, I translated some pages of the book Walt Whitman's Candid Conversation by Horace Traubel. The translation was published in Venezuela, and after that in the Spanish publishing house Pretextos. Now, I ask myself if that book and others like it have been reprinted in North America, because they deserve to do it. I refer to those of Walter Taylor and Clifton Joseph Furness, as well as the one of Richard Buck, whose main book, Cosmic Consciousness, is also very modern. They were ahead of their time. As to me, at present, I continue reading a lot, mainly thinkers like Alan Watts, and those who have affinity with him. For example, Prihod Capra, Jeff Foster, and David Bohm, who come from the modern physics, which is a true revolution that may change the world. I am only writing a sort of aphorism. This year, much of my prose will be published here. Now, to please Nydia, I will expose some of my ideas. Fundamentally, I think that nature does all. The wonder seems essential to me. That is why I got glad when I read this word of Goethe. The highest to which man can attain is wonder. But many people do not see that. It is time for human beings to become cosmopolitan. So the nationalist that causes most of the wars may lose force until disappear. Einstein even spoke about the cosmic man as a possibility. On the other hand, apart of that danger, the world is threatened now more than ever by totalitarianism. So we have to be alert. It seems that life is no longer sacred, or has really never been. Otherwise, there would not have had thousands of wars. I should say that every time that I speak or write, I defend democracy, although I know it is still very defective. It should be renovated, make it more engaged with social justice. But for that, it will require a mental change by means of education. Democracy has to be taught. Politically, I am rather anarchist, but pacific in the Taoist way, although I prefer not to define myself. We are in the cycle. Finally, I can say that to apply to Venezuela, the world crisis is a nationism. The situation is very serious, but I will not go into details by now. I intend to write about the themes of this talk in an article in Spanish that I will send to Nydia. Gracias again.
Gracias, Señor Cadenas, for that very moving, thoughtful, and haunting reminder of the state of the world, and also of a way in which we can, even under these circumstances, find the capacity to resist the external pressures. You quoted Goethe, I think, the highest which man can attain is wonder. And I agree wholeheartedly. This afternoon to me is something of a wonder. I just have to also say how strange and synchronous it is that you mentioned the physicist David Bohm, because he has been, he has manifested in Boston in a surprising and profound way very recently. And that suggests that there is a kind of global movement of which he was an avatar. So again, muchas gracias, Rafael Cadenas and Caracas. And I look forward to that essay, and I hope that we get to read that soon. Okay, so we will now return back to the United States, and it's my great privilege to introduce our next reader, though I think Fanny will say something about what she will be doing, because I'm not exactly sure that she will be reading. Fannie Howe is one of America's most important persons of letters, author of over 30 books, including poetry, novels, memoirs, and essays. She's received just about every award under the sun, including the Griffin Prize and the Lenore Marshall Award. Yet none of her brilliant previous work quite prepares one for the astonishment that is Manimal Woe. Part memoir, part investigation, and pure poetry throughout. The book is Howe's intimate, probing conversation with her late father, Mark DeWolf Howe, a celebrated civil rights lawyer, constitutional scholar, a professor at Harvard Law School, and the official biographer of Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., among his many achievements. Howe's conversation with her father is focused on the wound of slavery, which lacerates American history. What makes the book so timely and exhilarating is Howe's capacity to shift seamlessly from personal recollection to political observation to metaphysical speculation. Toward the end of the book, which opens with the lines, "Dear Daddy, don't worry, I know you're dead," Howe writes, "In the USA, where slavery is foundational, he discovered in the courts little more than evasions, self-delusions, hypocrisy, violent police, red herrings, and lies on the subject of race. People love owning slaves and have created an economy to explain this. A haunting observation. And I just want to remind you that after Thomas finishes reading, Fanny and Thomas will engage in a brief conversation that I'll moderate. So, Fanny, to you. Unmute, Fanny.
Sorry, I just wanted to thank everybody who is out there, invisible though you are. I'm very happy to be here with Thomas and Nydia and Askold and Ezra and all those who combine their brilliance to bring about our books and these talking sessions. I will read a portion of Manimal Woe out loud, about 2.5 pages. Then we'll play a 5-minute portion of text from the same book recorded at Mission Church in Roxbury, Massachusetts. It was put together by the sound artist and DJ Sue Sharp. It was a kind of coincidental event, not planned. But now I find it terribly interesting the way prose on a page can be transformed by hearing it in a whole new environment. And I know that the world is going in that direction. So here I am trailing along. And I'm just going to read one paragraph from Manimal Woe and then 1.5 pages. Is the civil rights movement, this my father wrote, by the way, is the civil rights movement only a part of a larger movement? How far are the American people willing to go in pressing this movement on toward radical change? A great many of the liberals, I take it, are very eager, genuinely, ardently, to find better solutions to our racial problems than we have yet been able to find. But I wonder whether that's going to be enough. Is there not perhaps need for a far more radical consideration of central issues in our society before we can solve this one? Of one thing I am sure, and that is that it cannot be done by law alone. The lawyer's role in this area, important as it is, will perhaps be less important from now on. That victory is within reach, but the need for the American people seems to me to be for changes which are not capable of control by lawyers, but which need the help of minds and spirits, very much broader and very much more radical in their inclination than the minds of lawyers are likely to be. That was his sort of epitaph on his own attempts in his life. That would have been written in about 1966. This is the second section I'll read. What I trusted as a child, I now believe. Really? How so? I see that we're all born equal, not because in our infancy we weigh about the same. But I shouldn't have to say this. No, you shouldn't. Doesn't born equal mean each is vital to the whole, more than value or place? Are we born equal before being born? We are born out of nothing, and into nothing we go. The rapid search for blood relatives in DNA is a sign of orphanhood. All is equal in potential. It has nothing to do with measurement. Darwin and the influence of embryos on ancestry studies. Was there a judge, a woman, a man waiting? Is growing up a metaphor for illness? Which would have come first, the action or the judgment on it? If judgment preceded action, then action would have to precede judgment. Time would be circular. Why did I think so much over the years? It's truly a mystery why you wanted to tell a secret to an invisible person using a rhythmic method and scores to do so. Surely related to the composition, surely related to the composition of music, thinking is a solitary and entirely mental activity. It's the brain at work, sieving out the effects of life on the body and shaking it into an order recognizable by its likeness to the other thoughts. It has to have a rhythm for the brain to stay focused on reproducing that beat from the blood and breath coursing from ear to ear. All we can trust now is that the things that we dominated to death will save the earth and creatures on it. Daddy, are you deaf or something? Do you breathe thoughts from under that stone in Quincy graveyard or from the skies around where the water folds and unfolds in bays and harbors? Squantum and Wollaston and the approach to Boston's brown bag sand, paupers and presidents must have shoveled their way north. We all have theories about what would happen after death, some bio-based, some class-based, and some incalculable. If you tried to recapitulate a life, you would find hollow spaces that ate the whole theory up. I'm sorry, Daddy, for forcing you to write humiliating reprovals to me for my failures and disappointments. I know you hated doing that, and I know your tone was already diminished, weary, and possibly leading to heart failure. Why do you always come back with your briefcase and a hat on and a look of guilt? To apologize? Is it the natural thing to do to be sorry for dying, but not guilty for it? God's policies amount to genocide after all. A mother knows this. And then we'll play the little piece of sound if Ezra can get it going.
A beauty-filled vision of reality where there's a quiet that creates a resting place between the one who sees and the one who is seen. The space, called the spirit, is self-contained and keeps braiding itself into lines, dimensions, circles that cross each other and meet and move on, while its wind or word whirls within it and produces thought, and thought produces speech, all of it contributing to the speed of evolution. So every word comes into existence as a sound, then slides back into non-existence. People get depressed by all this coming and going. They grow ill, weak, they die, but the mystery survives.
Let us pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Please be seated.
What I trusted as a child, I now believe.
Really? How so?
I see that we are all born equal, not because in our infancy we weigh about the same, but I shouldn't have to say this.
No, you shouldn't. It's a very privileged person speaking.
But doesn't born equal mean each is vital to the whole, more than value or place.
Are we born equal before being born?
We are born out of nothing, and into nothing we go. All is equal in potential.
It has nothing to do with measurement.
Was there a judge, a woman, a man waiting? Is growing up a metaphor for illness? Which would have come first, the action or the judgment on it? If judgment preceded action, then action would have to precede judgment. Time would be circular. Why did I think so much over the years?
It is truly a mystery why we wanted to tell a secret to an invisible person using a rhythmic method and scores to do so.
Surely related to the composition of music, thinking is a solitary and entirely mental activity. It's the brain at work, sieving out the effects of life on the body and shaking it into an order recognizable by its likeness to the other thoughts. It has to have a rhythm for the brain to stay focused on reproducing that beat from the blood and breath coursing from ear to ear.
All we can trust now is that the things that we dominated to death will save the earth and the creatures on it.
The Lord be with you. May the Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Fanny. Remarkable, those sonic effects. Yeah, the line, God's policies amount to genocide. A mother knows this. That's an indictment. There's also, just to continue the theme, David Bohm, the reference to all is equal in potential, reminds me of the film about David Bohm that some of our viewers might be interested in, called Infinite Potential. The things we dominate might save us. Let us hope. Thank you. Now, Thomas Sayers Ellis is the only living writer I know whose photograph has appeared on the front page of the New York Times Daily Edition. The occasion was an article about his work as co-founder of the Darkroom Collective and Reading Series, widely regarded as one of the most influential projects in American letters since the Black Arts movement of the 60s. Though best known as a poet, Ellis is also recognized internationally as a photographer, as well as a band leader, a co-founder with saxophonist James Brandon Lewis of Heroes Are Gang Leaders, a literary free jazz ensemble of writers, musicians, and artists who will, I believe, resume touring this fall. The book we're launching this afternoon, Crank-Shaped Notes, is, like Howe's, a hybrid. Part history of GoGo, Washington, D.C.'s official music, part Wordsworthian memoir about the growth of a poet's soul, and part philosophical exploration of the nature of community, GoGo music, family, and language. What makes reading Ellis so exhilarating is his unpredictability. Reading his sentences requires that the reader be ready to follow radical shifts and turns, ensuring maximum wakefulness. What I can assure you of is that after visiting Ellis's DC, you will never look at the nation's capital in the same way again. Ellis writes, "If it's still a song, it's not original. Original means all origin. All origin means Genesis, the place of the beginning, the origin or mode of formation of something. The enemy of formation is formula. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to a true American original, Thomas Sayers Ellis.
Thank you, Askold, very much. It's an honor to be reading with Fanny and Rafael, and something about the creative process. You know, I've carried this book around inside me probably since moments of high school, and it just grew and grew and grew, probably uncontrollably so. And nothing like this you get out by yourself. Every wind, every turn, every piece of assistance, even the assistance that you didn't know was assistance, is necessary. And wow, to Arrowsmith for basically shaking it out of me into the parts of the form that weren't even known to me. And I thank you very much. I'm gonna go between a few of the sections. It's divided into notes, into poems, into lyric prose, and I'll just announce what each section is and go from there and keep it going. Stick bag perspective. Think please of the first beat, titataboom, of the getting into skins, of the getting into heads, the way sticks do, however they became as virgin consciousness, neither male or female, the sacrificial search for identity forced to depart the divine. Physical thinking not portrayed as drum belly or bubble, not portrayed as the maze like creases of the brain, and not portrayed as a large seed planted at the top of the human plant that wishes to become a tree in the middle of a colony of ideas. Once we were the trees that grew to and from the heavens. Once we were the breath of fire, the fire spitters, carbon bonfires of speech, capable of the scorching alphabet of the dragon, the twin enemy of the beast, C33 or 6x6. Once our beastness contained no art or arc, just a spark like the chrome between a flame and a fire, air cells. How one gets an extension through an atmosphere that is as organic as the weather behind our eyes, the climate we sneeze, and the catastrophes caused by a cough of the self. All mucus is reproductive, but it is the mind that alters the material, a daughter in the womb, a son in the world. Through a newborn pours the liquid and stone of passed on creation, of the age that ends in a mold, the flesh tech, and becomes a slightly changed beginning. Another non-fictitious take of my personal path. Note 245, which Askold just quoted. If it's still a song, it's not original. Original means all origin. All origin means Genesis, the place of beginning, the original mode of formation of something. The enemy of formation is formula. Industry nurtures formula. Song is sound prison. Formula, like science, hides the song in a pattern, an equation that imitates either destruction or creation, DC. A choice of formats, a creativity you cannot hear until true origin, the twice inverted OG, the original genesis of GoGo, unearths it. Radio fell like a star from the word radiation. A hit is in no way an indication of originality, especially a hyphenated one. No bridge in the go or the going, just go. Once a star hits the ground, it either becomes a rap or a rock, as shiny as aluminum. The alum of formula is fame. Theme song, I'm gonna live forever. You might live forever if the right label buries you on a chart, or short-lived flame. There it is on the face of Gnosticism, the complete songs of GoGo Nostradamus, a box set, wearing a mask. Note number 244, Capitonin. To make the connection between Sais and Sicily or Sicilians, the dark Italians, and Scythe civilians. One must give the proper nod to the proper dawn, darkness, or the figure in the shadows, the figure on the hill, the producer, Washington Diocese. So many Catholic schools in the district must be the military Holy Ghost of Caesar's empire, Vatican City, DC, Vito Corleone, and Shorty Corleone, the Godfather, the GoGo Godson, God the Father, a pocket full of mafioso priests, capable of hiding Gregorius in Gregory, sugar in Saint, and a spinner in a circus, a circle, spinner Minnesota, snake face Boniface, to make the connection between Latin and the Los Latinos, Pops, Pap, Papa, Papal, Pope, John Russell Pope, La Cosa Nostra, La Gogo Nostra, our thing, like an army, like a soldier's covenant. Glowing salvations were not the only business the Ciceros were about. The Rosicrucian rose of silence, a crucifix in a paw, a pope like Curtis, like Pops, who can move the sun to midnight, midnight to Rome, and Rome to an enclave along the Potomac. America has 13 cities named Rome. Underbar swagger, Chuck Brown is crowned. Note the rings like jewels on the album cover to mend the stormy moods between medieval and Mediterranean releases. Cover them with a tender, formal act of submission, with an odyssey of 2001 ring finger kisses. Stick bag perspective. Years ago, the poetry had already begun the way poetry begins in the body, not separated from the mind, in sound and sense, feeling for its shape. For one what does not know who has ever felt before, all the unknown knotted knowledge that connect and disconnect, repair and sever the layers of self that exist in flesh. When it poured, when the poetry would not stop coming, poems were thrown away, and the sound they made, their nuance and form crumbled on the paper planets that imprisoned them as they were cataloged into categories. Before tossing them, I drew on their blank backs just to peel the percussive facade off of non-reality. The first art I loved was drawing. For all of the rim shots in Dante's drum kit, a terzarima, the best made stanza could only hold a portion of the rhythm in any portrait. Unlike the toms, which could twist and tune and tone to an exact likeness, like, dislike, like, dislike. A preference made less paternal by the intervals in the motion of sticks and the numerous profiles in the patterns, the use of both hands, always looking back and forth between the things that taught you to roll hard and soft, the way you did when your father left. Well, at least he came back and made sure you went to more concerts than funerals. And before leaving, talked you into the discipline and forms, katas and sparring of Taekwondo, that were a necessary preference to your coming fascination with the rudiments of words and drumming, where you became an active student of diagramming, grooves, pre-poem poetry, percussive prosody, the process that prepared not just your ears, but your reverse pouring pores, those holes of sensitive curiosity to the avalanche of Black voices, African American, and the eyes of otherness you'd encounter in the up in the Northern South, where books with inner beats full of struggle and pleasure rush towards you for the borrowing, for the buying, for the taking, yes, the taking, and for eventually carrying around inside of you until you became one of them or too many of them. Walking words, call it sacrifice, so-called maturity. Either way, you lost many things finding that so-called tree, which confused itself in the service of career. So many things at times you didn't even recognize yourself or the selves around you, but you had to look deeply, and it hurt. Like being born away from your birth without having grown, but able to see growth. Here the ground from which growth dies, no soft tissue or paper to transform the wiry ideas of silence into a system of sound, a sound system, one without language or a percussive portal of the substance of life to call parent, not even a blurred vision of it in the stance of what can only be described as the lie of distance. Scribes describe to describe their own blurry scribble. They unscribe to self. You lost the constant sight of your mother, the feeling eyes between you, the shared shape of the world, the flat sphere vision. It was difficult, watching and not being watched from places like Montgomery, Boston, Cambridge, Providence, and Cleveland. The bridge of sound became a hyphen, a pen, keystone and keyboard. Used incorrectly, the hyphen dashed into hours like stabs, not constructive linear steps toward home, not Carl Shapiro's violent obelisk that you could never doubt. The best book inside you, your mother, you were her, she, you. Crank-shaped note, number 39. No homegrown shadow ever ran off and became a senator. No local pastor ever mentioned how, in Greek, Holy Ghost means breathing. No tidy the talker or city council member ever admitted that the city, not the community, are the consumers of human life. And no council of noblemen ever allowed its rank to be infiltrated by any level of monitor man without a full social and percussive vetting. Even the backup side piece is investigated by one of the manager's reliable henchmen, by Bacchus. Crank-shaped note 193, kill a cow. The skill to kill all ill clowns who think they own the crown, cow, a killer, verbal slaughter in the pillar, flower bed stiller, words buried alive, wake, woke, riding by alphabets in a rhyme, kill seed. A cavalry of grammar artillery, armed, all in all, rare what, Bama's died, air cow arrived, ascend to tax the ground, a zilla, the animal, lick the laughter, call the killer, collar on hold, call waiting, cow busy, melting haters. To kill all ill crowns who think they own the crowd. Stem cell syllables, lyrical appendectomy. Most dictionary definitions, nosebleed from its trigger. Kill a city, kill a sightseer, tour guide, caught doing the killer calories, la la la, la la la. Cow tolerates lactose freestyle rants, reverse, spit the milk out the cereal, serial killer. Killer calcium for all microphone victims, busted lips, villa rebuilder, villa bit manila, trophies near the ropes, first place tropes, the skill to kill all ill crowds who think they own the caliber and enterprise, crowned by success and natural causes. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Amazing. Your mother, you were her, she, you. The mothers in the last lines always come through and are always there. So I've got a number of questions. We're now going to shift to a conversation between Thomas and Fanny, and I've got a couple of questions. I'm probably going to cut it down to 2 or 3, and I'm hoping that the question will just prompt a conversation between you, and then I will throw another one in when you've said your say. There's some remarkable similarities between your books in that they're both memoirs and investigations. Both are also about origins, about families. In your case, Fanny, mainly about your father, and for you, Thomas, one can't miss the hovering presence of your mother. One striking difference that's quite funny is that your book, Thomas, Crank-Shaped Notes, is richly peopled, abounding in vivid profiles of different members of the GoGo community, friends, living and dead, family. While in Manimal Woe, Fanny, there's a lovely passage in which you, Fanny, say what you missed about home, where the trees, bushes, robins, cardinals, yellow leaves, chipmunks, lilacs, and other wildlife. That is not people. So let's begin by talking about worlds apart. I wonder if you could both tell us something about how the voices you heard growing up continue to echo for you.
Me?
Sure, Thomas.
Well, for me, great question. And you're dead on about what you just said about cranks. Even before learning to read, I remember coming in contact with what we call the oral tradition, which doesn't just mean music. It means sound, tell, stories, or a form of literature in all genres that you sort of take in or absorb before you ever pick up a book. It can be the chatter of uncles at a party, gossip. It could be the tales that are passed down about survival stories, survival codes, things passed down from the plantation, so to speak, that are coded so that you know what to do in certain situations in life and what not to do. Usually those things take on the form of animal tales, Brer Rabbit, Brer Bear, and things like that, but always a lesson and always a reaching to become, not yet, but a reaching eventually become literature. As with the lives that you come in contact with, which once you are given a book, you can't help but wonder where those lives are. The lives that I guess you grew up with or were around you. Where are they in the work? Why have they been sort of not erased, but overlooked by eloquence, the high-minded levels of intellectual hierarchy, whatever you want to call it, but they're usually lost. So I think one of the missions, and usually if it's good, I think the missions sort of integrate into the aesthetic, etc. But one of the missions I think of Crankshake Notes is to bring those lives to literature and literature to those lives. And it's tough because depending on how well of an integrator or balancer or whatever you are in the craft, you either overdo it or underdo it. And I tend to overdo. I tend to crowd and try to get as much in the draft that I can and then take away. And then I'm usually left with more than enough. So those people and those voices, there are ways of making them populate the grammar or become the grammar. So they're not just their names, they're what their names mean, where the names come from. And DC is rich with that, under, behind, near, far away from the monuments. And I think to move beyond symbol or to snatch back the integrity from symbol, to purpose to fill in or heal the gap between people and what DC is, a whole lot of public institutions. I think that's how that all happened and why it happened for me.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. And you've done that, absolutely. Fanny?
Yes, I am fascinated by DC because I lived there in solitary confinement for a couple of years as visiting teaching at Georgetown, and I was just overwhelmed by the sense of ghosts everywhere. Every room, every street, every bus I took, everywhere I went, there were ghosts. It was thick in the atmosphere. And there are only little portions of cities I've ever felt that before. Right. But there's something, even when you just say the word Potomac,
yes,
that to me is so poetic and so full of meaning. And so that to me came out of your book, was this kind of ghost-driven place, as if someone had bopped you on the head and you were seeing stars. It was kind of a constellation of voices and people. My childhood was spent in with very few ghosts because of the limited history of the kind of family I grew up in here. It's very pale and very tiny and ultimately unimportant. But the only thing I had to throw it off the linear ghost line was my mother being from Dublin and being fully Irish, and the way she brought all the language of Ireland with her. And that was what threw me off. I would never have done anything without the sound of my mother's language. So that's it.
So there's so many epigrammatic passages in both your books. I'm spoiled for choice where to begin. But how about here? Fanny, your book probes the tension between liberty and equality. You quote your father saying early on, liberty and equality are incompatible. This is the first contradiction you need to know. It describes the fault line in America and its constitution. Could you say more about this? And then Thomas, perhaps you might respond.
I could say that it was something we discussed often. My father brought it up first by comparing, when I was about 10 or something, comparing a neighbor's house to a house we had passed that wasn't all dolled up. And he said that is the result of liberty. And just keep your eyes open, because you'll notice there is another energy going along the whole time, which is the will to equality. And they don't match up.
Yeah.
And so that would be it.
And growing up in DC, you're bombarded with signs and symbols of the surface of liberty and equality. Every 4 years, there's an election or an inauguration and parades. And I particularly remember 1976 because it's the year my dad left, and it's also the year of the bicentennial. And I remember in Washington, all over the city, except for in the Black neighborhoods, which was fine, of course, they were preparing for the bicentennial. I mean, the city basically looked like a birthday cake. There was the old style draperies and flags, and just everything was that, 200, 200, 200, 200. You saw 1776 everywhere. You saw 1976 everywhere, as if someone was convincing you of the time, the documents, and what it meant to be the citizenry, to be citizen. And we bought it. Carter was inaugurated, as I recall, came into office, and that whole narrative of the peanut farmer, etc. The surface narrative, of course, up from Georgia, etc. But it always seemed that the equality and liberty, I don't want to say not the lie of them, because there's a lie in everything, really, truly in everything. If there's more than one person involved, there's a lie and a truth in everything. But it always seemed to stand for, or its biggest symbol, the flag. And the flag in DC never seemed to mean the inner city, the workers, the people. It seemed to me something that was to be reached for, something that was to eventually, I guess, be rebranded as a protective device, but never people, simply government. So there was always this duality, in DC of being home and not being home. And what will be truer, could be truer, because it's actually underneath of everything in the historical DC cycle. It is true. For instance, in some communities in DC, we don't say slaves. I mean, we were slaves for the people who believed that, but some people say prisoners of war. And if you say prisoners of war and not slaves, that changes the whole pre-1776 history and a lot of the other history and everything that happens. Civil War, the burning of Washington, 1812, all of those things that start the narrative anew or give you a reason to hold on to certain facts. And it's interesting. So liberty and equality are always to me, for the inner city Black, at least it was, because now even the cover of my book has a flag. You know, it's funny because on the cover of the book, I thought to first request that the flag be upside down, you know, just to be me about it. And it's that way though. You know, if you're in the city, you're right side up. If you're downtown, you're upside down. If you go somewhere else, and it's like that, depending on what you're looking at, what monument you're looking at, what history you're taking in. Are you at Harper's Ferry, or are you at Mount Vernon? Are you on the mall with the Smithsonian and all those narratives, right? From natural history to aerospace. And there's multiple narratives all squeezing into you to make that flag wave, Then you go to the GoGo and you wave your hands in the air like you just don't care, they say. Try to answer that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, you know, I've got a bunch of other questions that I'd like to follow up with, but I know our time here is limited. And you know, there's a question I had, Thomas, about a passage in GoGo where you talk about Chuck Lewis Brown's hair, and you say that he was not African American, not in the government definition of African American. He was pre-Native American. His people were already here before America was America. He was more than American. And that's a really interesting, in a sense, of a different kind of history. So I guess that is part of what you're talking about. Or is there a specific fact that you're pointing to there?
Well, look, fact, the blood, the people, the land is the fact. Without a doubt, there's land before America. Without a doubt. So if there's land before America, there's land before narrative. And I was taught the basic narrative. But also in grade school, junior high school, I would always ask the teacher, in which Smithsonian were the slave ships? And the teacher would always say, well, I don't know where they are. You know, we don't know. We know, like, how long has it been? How long would it take me to see a slave ship in the Smithsonian? So thus the questioning of the pre-narrative and the pre-narrative and the pre-narrative. So I'm not pointing to a fact because honestly, to the creative writer, and maybe I don't inscribe to this, but a writer said to me years ago, who was an elder, your job is to invent the truth, but with integrity. So the fact is not a recorded thing because the fact is a buried thing. And I don't want to spend time as a writer proving the buried or even unburying the buried, but I want the reader, right, to have a conversation with his or herself about where they will allow the narrative to begin. Because it's almost impossible to begin the narrative at the beginning. Even if we talk about, Fanny said a great line that stuck with me now, I can't remember what it was, about something not being before something. But I grew up in a Baptist church. You know, I don't go to a Baptist church now, but I know my great-grandmother often spoke of the war in heaven. But I would always say, boy, great-grandmama, where's that in his book? Oh, they mention it in the end, she would say. They mention, maybe the end is the beginning. So what I'm saying about Chuck Brown, if in crank-shaped notes, if you follow the language and follow the land, it makes you ask questions that just don't add up to the official story. And that's, I think, one of the jobs is to say, hey, look at this story. The pieces of the puzzle don't fit together. My mom always said I was Cherokee. And did she mean I was Cherokee because her ancestor met somebody who was here? Or did she mean we were already here? Did she mean we were Native? Now, even that Native, or as Derek teaches, to think of history in terms of epochs of light, Derek Walcott, epochs of light, we know even that epoch would be late in the narrative. If I trace my family to the Native Americanists, the prisoner of warness, the overtaking of the country, even that, even pyramids, right? Pyramids found all over the world. That even changes the narrative. So to say that thing about having a fact, well.
No, I hear you. Yeah, I get it. Yes.
They're not rooted.
Right.
Fullness.
Right. Fanny, anything to say to that?
I suppose a number of people have asked, what does your title mean? And to me, it's obvious what it means. But then I see there's a very pornographic site called Manimal. But anyway, I was thinking of evolution and how much pain there is in developing into something else than what you are, and that comes out of the ground literally. And we are not yet fully developed in any possible way. We need so many extra things to keep going through a day. It can't be that it was perfectly produced. So my feeling is that I felt so much in the same mind as Thomas when he was reading it, even more than when I was reading the book, that there's some similarity there in our thinking, which has to do with being conscious, having a consciousness that includes physical being, the brain. For instance, we were both obsessing over the brain, and people didn't do that 20 years ago in poems or in stories. So there's some new thing happening to us all at the same time about being physical and being, and maybe this pandemic has made it even more alive, that super consciousness. But anyway, I just was really moved by the similarities in what we were thinking about.
Yeah. You know, I've just so I want to get to what maybe the last kind of big question I have, because it's I think central here. Your book's obvious point of intersection is of course race. Both your treatment of it avoid the unfortunately shop-worn language around the subject permeating not only the popular press but also academia. Reading you both, I feel I'm standing on higher ground. It's precisely the sort of uplift by which I measure the truth value of a work. So now I'd like to read you a quote from an essay by Howard Thurman, who you'll know perhaps as Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor at Boston University. And a shout out to James Brandon Lewis for turning me on to Thurman's gorgeous books, which should be part of the core curriculum in all our schools. This is from Deep River, an interpretation of Negro spirituals. In writing about the spiritual heaven, heaven, which many of you will recognize from its first lines, I got shoes, you got shoes, all God's children got shoes, Thurman observes, even at that far-off moment in the past, these early singers put their fingers upon the most vulnerable spot in Christianity and democracy. The greatest enemy to honesty and directness in human relations is the moral apathy resulting from power on the one hand and fear on the other.
Well, you know, each man, since we're speaking of Thurman, speaks from the liberations, the advantages, and the limitations of his age, the age in which, excuse the term, producing or he is engaged in. Then Thurman and Dr. King and people like that have a slight advantage, not because of what we think of them now, but because the way in which they were made. They are, in fact, made men. They belong to a club. No matter what color, no matter which battle, they are still elite in a sense. And, you know, and having said that, there's a duty that goes with that, a responsibility, maybe even an assignment. So having said that, these are successful, like for instance, DC hero, Benjamin Banneker, right? He's the Black man who's called in to fix remember the map of the city when the Frenchman, Pierre L'Enfant, is cast out and quits. And Banneker's called in, he was an assistant, he remembers, he does almanacs, he's an astronomer. So we think of him when we give a name of school after him and we teach kids about him as, you know, the Black History Month figure that just happened to get called in because he was smart, but no way. He was an astronomer, he made almanacs, he was a made person. He was in the club, though Black. Now, having said that, Thurman's right for his age, but I don't think that's the biggest picture. I don't think that that gap, because that gap lessens between those in the club as you climb higher up the, call it privilege, call it what you want. Trust me, no matter what the media version of the struggle is. And I always think that the greater foe, the greater enemy, the greater poison to it all is simply deception, because deception contains all the schools of the problem, every single one of them. And it is what we are indoctrinated with the most. Everything. You snatch deception, the rug of deception from off the table or the floor, and the rest of it falls. It bleeds, it falls, it recovers. Not so much tomorrow if you take away any other of the isms. Remember, the isms are just a branch, ugly as they may be on that tree, but just a branch. So I would say deception is far greater, a worse serpent for me.
Fanny?
Well, yes, I come out with an outburst about hypocrisy, which is, I guess, the same thing. But when you started talking about man, I naturally thought woman, and thought about how I feel that women have an experience when they have sex or when they get pregnant that is so profound and so universal, so the same for everyone, that it crosses all these questions and eliminates them in a way that isn't fully discussed. I don't think that the feminist conversation has yet, or it probably has, but I haven't seen it, gone down deep enough into the physical body of the female as a spiritual lesson that hasn't yet surfaced enough.
Right.
And that's I'm not trying to sort of proselytize for women, but just in conversation with what you're saying about ladders of understanding, I do think that has not yet entered fully enough.
Right. And let me just not to prophesize on the other side, because I never actually stand for, or I try to rid myself, and where none of us is in the flesh is successful totally of it. But I think that even the journey out of a body into another body, from micro to macro to solar, was ever taught properly in health class. That journey, that what it takes to leave a dimension, right, inner, however long you're there, to out into another. That whole thing is dark and misunderstood and left to no one, so to speak. But that's the whole picture. And having said something, having wanting to know of that would again fix everything. It would fix pornography. It would just fix everything that's been given a wrong vocabulary. Because the wrong vocabulary makes the maze of the mind, that makes the behavior, that makes the so necessary. And someone knows this. Someone knows of the substance that makes the substance that makes the flesh, that makes another substance that leaves, that makes the soul, that makes someone knows.
Well, it's not me. Last 2 minutes, because we do need to, we're happily over time, and I would happily go on, but I asked you both what question it is you wanted to be asked. And Thomas, you said you wanted to be asked what is worse than racism, and Fanny, you asked what you imagine for the future of this country and the world. So I wonder if briefly you could take on these very light questions.
Well, I'd like Thomas to answer my question, and I'll answer his.
That sounds good.
Okay, what was Fanny's question again?
What do we have to look forward to? Basically.
Well, without a proper knowledge of the history, the whole history of humankind, truly, if the bad guys win, we have to look forward to being changed. If the good guys win, we have to look forward to being changed.
Yeah. What was Thomas's question?
What is worse than racism?
Oh, hypocrisy.
Right. And I say deception.
Yeah.
Which, and I say, and I think that it's one of the, I think that racism, I used to always argue with the kids in school who would say, race is a construct. But those kids would never say, and I never disagreed with them, but they would never put anything else in the construct bag. They wouldn't put nature in the construct bag. They wouldn't put the sky, the sun rising, sun setting in the construct bag. That stuff was always natural. And I think it's time that, I think we're being shown that the construct might be 100% full spectrum dominance, as they say. And I don't know how to combat that. It's not a matter of good versus evil, or you just do deeds, or whatever. So I think that's tough.
Yeah. Thank you. But I was just going to say that in response to if the bad guys win, we will be changed. The good guys win, I would say that we will change ourselves. I think to me that's the big difference.
Well, I agree, but I think that too, it really depends who made us.
And and that question is just too big for us to take on now. Thank you so very much to both of you again. Sorry, we've got we are well over time. Thank you to those of you who stuck around.
Thank you, Askold.
Thank you.
And Thomas, thank you.
And Nydia and Rafael and Ezra, and those of you again who've joined us this afternoon. I do hope that you will click on the link that was sent to you. And it is also, Ezra has just put it in the chat too. You can also click on the link and buy these 3 remarkable books. Thank you again. Muchas gracias para todos, all of you. And till next time, thank you.